When we began to put together this conference on reconciliation in the Institute for Philosophy and Religion, one of the people I most wanted to ask to join us was Padraig O'Malley, because of his experience not only in Northern Ireland and in South Africa and in Iraq, in many of the world's hotspots. Padraig is a native of Dublin, educated at University College Dublin as well as Yale, Tufts, and Harvard. He currently holds a remarkable title, remarkable for its memorialization of a great Boston congressman and for describing a set of duties that fit him uniquely to a T. He is the John Joseph Moakley Professor of Peace and Reconciliation at UMass Boston. He is also a visiting professor of political studies at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. Having spent time in Northern Ireland during the troubles of the 1970s and 80s, Padraig became interested in South Africa's post-apartheid transition. He conducted interviews over 10 years between 1989 and 1999 with participants in South Africa's transition to democracy to produce an engaging oral history of the process, which you can access online at his website, The Heart of Hope. He hosted meetings in Boston and Belfast of central South African factions. In 2007, he turned his attention to Iraq, and over the past year has helped arrange 2 conferences that brought together Iraqi leaders from across the country's sectarian divide, Sunni, Shia, and Kurd, who met with experienced negotiators from South Africa and Ireland who described the processes toward peace in their own countries. The principle behind this triangulation strategy of negotiation, as he told BU Today earlier this week, quote, divided societies are in a better position to help other divided societies. He likens it to a sort of 12-step program. Addicts know addicts. They might be able to help each other with relative division. Professor O'Malley is the author, among other works, of The Uncivil War, Ireland Today, Biting at the Grave, The Irish Hunger Strikes and the Politics of Despair, Religion and Conflict, and Shades of Difference, Maharaj and the Struggle for South Africa, published with a foreword by Nelson Mandela. The title of his talk this afternoon is Unjust War, Impossible Reconciliation, referring to the situation in Iraq. I've asked him to say first a few words about his experience in Iraq and what he takes to be the situation there.
Thanks, Alan. You just about summed everything up, and I think we can proceed right now to the questioning part of the program. I went to, as Alan said, my experience in having worked in Northern Ireland from really about 1972 to the present, but seriously until the beginning of the 1990s, 1992 or 1993. I then turned, as he said, my attention to South Africa, in part because I had exhausted, I thought, what I had to say and write about Northern Ireland, and instead of spending the rest of my life going around from conference to conference saying the same thing over and over again, I struck out for new territory and maybe new ideas. And I got a unique opportunity there because the chief negotiators on every side of the conflict allowed me to interview them while they were conducting their negotiations. And because what I wanted to capture was what went on in negotiating practices or in actual negotiations, not what people said went on 10 years later when they said, well, we followed this model of conflict, we followed that model based on these theoretical foundations. I wanted to see how did they really do it. And what they really did it was a messy process, and nobody ever really knew what was going on, and sometimes they didn't even have the vaguest idea where they were going. But what I did learn from the ANC, from Cyril Ramaphosa, who was the chief negotiator for the African National Congress and who later played a role in Northern Ireland, he said, and there's not a drop of Irish blood in Ramaphosa, he said, we outdrank them. I thought, what do you mean? He said, well, we had this process of where we would start at like 7 o'clock every morning. And we would work a hard day until maybe 6 in the evening, and then we would have dinner, and then we'd say, we must engage with each other. So they'd put out some Scotch whiskey, and they would drink until 3 in the morning. When your knock on your door comes at 6, get up. First session starts at 7. For the first week or two, your stamina is fine, but then your stamina begins to wear down. And African voices are much more insistent than Afrikaner voices, and slowly the Afrikaners caved in. Oh, go away, please! My head is splitting. Can't you see? But also, and this is very important because I used it too in Northern Ireland, drinking as a way of bringing people together. Because when they drink together and they drink enough together, they get hangovers. When they get hangovers, they start bonding with each other in ways that they never thought before. And suddenly people are saying, you wouldn't have a Valium on you, would you? Gee, you give me half? You're my friend for life. Relationships change, and negotiations and outcomes are all about human relationships. And that's my starting point of everything. So, but what I did notice in South Africa was that the Northern Irish, or the South Africans, were behaving in ways that were very similar to the way that the heads of political parties thought and reacted together whenever I brought them together in locations in Northern Ireland. And I began to build on this, notice what were the similarities between them, and that because they seemed to have a set of psychological characteristics that were peculiar only to people from divided societies, and I can go through some of them in the question and answer if you want to know what they were, I thought, maybe the South Africans who reached a settlement in 1994 could help the Northern Irish. So I began to sell this idea to the parties in Northern Ireland for about 3 years, because they said, to tell you the truth, they're all a racist lot. What do these guys, blacks, have to tell us about how we should negotiate with each other? What do they know about real conflict? Part of the problem. Our problem is different than theirs. One of the key characteristics of people from divided societies is that they think their conflict is unique, that there has never been a conflict like theirs. So when you bring them together, the first thing they begin to recognize is that, gee, his problem seems to be just like mine. I'm not unique. I'm just another bloody lousy divided society. There's a long queue, So finally, and I did this through stages of process and part manipulation, where I managed to a process to arrange for both Cyril Ramaphosa and his counterpart on the government side, a man named Rolf Meyer, during negotiations to come to Boston together and to be our graduate speakers, our commencement speakers, in 1993. Now, that took a lot of work, but it meant these two guys, the two chief guys, that were on their own for 4 or 5 days. And they were treated equally, and Ramaphosa, who was treated as a hero, and Meyer, who was treated as an outcast, psst, apartheid, He treated Meyer with respect. And respect is one of the key things in negotiations, having respect for your opponent. You may disagree, but respect him as a person. And out of that, a year later, I had them go to Northern Ireland, meet with all the parties there, and they came back and told President Mandela that they thought they could help the parties in Northern Ireland, and Mandela, being Mandela, said, I will only help if I am invited to be of assistance. So I had to go back again and have them all write letters, signed letters, because I wrote the letters, kind of begging, asking for his assistance. And that happened, and they all came out to South Africa. And they spent 4 days. And it was one of the turning points of one of them, because everyone says they were there at the turning point in the Northern Ireland political process. But it was one of the turning points. And it's not I who say so, it's the Northern Irish who said so. The South Africans were able to unlock, first of all, they heard the South African narrative of how they came out of their own conflict. Now, it wasn't just the winners who were there, it was the losers who were there too. So you had people from the far right, Buthelezi, the man who received an honorary degree from this university when John Silver was president, but was despised by many South Africans, except by his own followers, as a sellout. You had the ANC, you had the apartheid government negotiators, you had everybody, every side. And they met one-on-one, and they met in sessions, and they were able to unlock some issues. And in fact, it was their own behavior that allowed a key issue to be addressed. Because when they were coming, the IRA was not on a ceasefire, so they said, you know, we're not coming at the Ian Paisley's party, and their delegation was headed by a man named Peter Robinson, who is now the First Minister of Northern Ireland, and the Sinn Féin IRA delegation was headed by Martin McGuinness, who is now the Deputy First Minister, and both of them were in the White House last week together meeting with President Obama, so that's how times changed just in 11 years. But at that time, you know, I had to convince Paisley that his delegation wouldn't even see somebody from Sinn Féin. Such was the tension and division between them. So we split the area up into, over here on the far right, miles away, you had the Unionists. Over here on the far left, you had the Sinn Féin IRA. In the middle, you had a compound where everybody could meet. You had a accommodation, a restaurant, and a bar on both sides and in the middle. So I took Robinson around. He was the first person there, and showed him everything. And I'm telling you this story for a purpose. Showed him everything, and thought he'd be very pleased at the length we had gone to ensure that nobody could, he wouldn't even bump into somebody from Sinn Féin. It'd be by accident. And his only comment to me was, he said, Padraig, their bar, Sinn Féin bar, is bigger than our bar. And I said, well, Peter, you guys don't drink. He said, no difference. Our bar's got to be as big as theirs. And there was no joke. We had to kind of structure something and pull things together until they were satisfied. Now, I'll come around to that later on. What I want to say is it's a symptom of divided societies. Again, a feature, a peculiar feature. It's called, I think, in the literature, the narcissism of small differences. But you're always looking to see, is the other side in any way being treated in a way that would suggest that they might be being treated better, or in a superior way, or that diminishes your status vis-a-vis them in any way, and that applies to everything. Well, they had 3 days, I said 4 days there, and afterwards they gave great praise when they themselves reached an agreement in Northern Ireland a year later, the Good Friday Agreement. They gave great praise to the role of South Africa had played. And when I said it taught them to see things differently, I'll go back to the division thing. Mandela came down for half a day, but the Unionists would not meet in the same room as Sinn Féin to hear him talk to them. So I had to go to Mandela and say, Mr. President, would you tolerate a little apartheid here? You know, do it twice? And he said, yeah. But what it gave the opportunity for Mandela to deliver 2 different messages. And the messages he gave to Sinn Féin was, he said, if you want to get into the negotiating process, you have to declare a ceasefire. If you don't do that, a permanent ceasefire, no more on, off, a permanent ceasefire. And they had great admiration for Mandela. The Unionists, not so much. A lot, but not on the same level. When he went to the Unionists, he said, I note that you are making two demands of Sinn Féin. You want them, one, to declare a ceasefire, and secondly, you want them to decommission their arms, i.e., to get rid of all their arms dumps. He said, you've got to decouple those issues if you want to get them into a negotiating process, demand and go for the permanent ceasefire, and make the second issue into one that can be dealt with during the negotiating process. And that, in fact, is the way it worked out. Now, that second issue, which was dealt with in the negotiating process, that took 10 years to play out and was not finally resolved until March 2007. That's when McGuinness and Ian Paisley became Paisley First Minister, McGuinness Deputy First Minister, and then Paisley stepped down. And when he was stepping down, he was asked, are you going to appoint your successor, Dr. Paisley? And he said, I'm no Mr. Putin. To get his joke on the president. That was, but, so, in January 2007, there was a conference at Tufts where a number of Iraqis from political parties were present, and it just almost just came into my mind, hey, maybe we should bring some South Africans and some Northern Irish, and let's see, is there any interaction? And at that time, it was at the height of the Shia-Sunni sectarian violence in Baghdad. And when the conference, I brought in some South Africans and Northern Irish, had them talk in depth on their own, in private, one-on-one, with nobody else present, with the Iraqis. And the Iraqis said at the end, if you can put it together in a neutral country and bring us together with the chief negotiators who put a settlement together in Northern Ireland and the chief negotiators for South Africa, we think something could be gained. That was just the first step. The next step was to get a country. Sorry, the next step was to get a funder. And I had a great man. His name is Robert Benditson. He's a trustee at Tufts University. And he said, Padraig, I'll fund it. If you think it can be done, I'll fund it. I said, I'll take a lot of money. He said, I'll fund it. So to have somebody make that open commitment and not having to report everything you did back to a foundation saying, I spent $100 on bribing people, okay? An important part of the business, I want to tell you, I'll tell you in a minute. But anyway, I got into Iraq by the back door because there's no front door to get in to Iraq by. You're either in the military, or you're a contractor, or you're with the State Department, or you're with an accredited NGO. And if you don't, you can't get in. So I was able to arrange to get in through somebody. But I was restricted for most of the part to the Green Zone and to a hotel there. It's the only hotel in the entire Green Zone called the Al Rashid Hotel, which is opposite the Parliament, which is where I wanted to be anyway. So I had my little life between the Al Rashid Hotel, and it was at the end of the Green Zone, and I could take a walk out of the Green Zone and go into downtown Baghdad, what they call the Red Zone, if I liked. Not advised at that time, but and not something that I wanted to do because it would be stupid and foolish and interfere with the reasons I went there. So the first time I made two trips to Iraq, and went to the got appointments with the two vice presidents, one Shia and one Sunni, and they both gave their blessing. And once I got their blessing, I was able to move fairly aggressively with their respective political parties, Shia and Sunni. And we took 16 of them to, so I pulled them out, I literally pulled them out of Iraq, because everything in Iraq has to be paid for in cash. And that was the occasion. I had to, with 40,000 in literally my back pocket, walk out into downtown Iraq, or get a guy who drove me to where I would get the tickets. and picked up the tickets and made my way back. And I did not, I remember one awful moment, I did not for a moment turn off my cell phone at a checkpoint, and they were going to confiscate my phone, which is standard procedure, and I had to literally get down on my knees and beg for the phone because I had all my contacts for other people in Iraq, which maybe perhaps didn't matter very much because the phone system doesn't work. But it gave me the illusion of being able to be in contact. So got them to a man, on the plane to a man, and I'm thinking, no, we'd gone to Helsinki, and this was being held in Helsinki with our partner was the Crisis Management Initiative. It is the NGO of Marty Ahtisaari, who is won the Nobel Prize for Peace last year. So we get to a man, and I thought, my job is over now. But they would not accept, again it's difficult, they would not accept the conditions in the hotel. Now the Queen Alley Hotel not Queen Alley, the Queen, last name is Queen, not this one. Right, there's one hotel, it's an airport hotel, standard airport hotel, and they said the conditions weren't up to their standards, number one. And two, because it took so long to get them out, and because they did not have Schengen visas and therefore could not fly west to get to Helsinki, like couldn't fly them from Amman to Frankfurt to Helsinki, I had to fly them east through either Kiev or through Istanbul or as far as Cairo to get them connections that would not have them land in any European country, and they would end up in Moscow and then go from Moscow on to Helsinki, and they objected. They said, and they gave me 2 days. I had to get them out early because there was a very important feast coming up, and that meant a boycott, and that meant nothing could move. So they said, you have 3 days to work it out. Meanwhile, I had to move them to a better hotel. Now they were getting a little bit happier, being treated the way they were taught they should be treated. Anyway, it ended up I had to hire a private jet and land the jet in Amman and put them on the jet. Now, here's where a little bit of bribery comes in, because I asked when all this were complaining, where's the plane? Where's the plane? I said, please. This time I myself was praying just to keep my temper, you know, because we're now not in very good relations. I lashed out at them for their inconsideration and this, that, the other, and they kind of looked at me and said, well, funny man, this Irishman. Thank God he's not American. You know, he's worse than the Americans. But we were slowly beginning to bond because we were together. So I got the driver. I said, do you know where we're going? This is the airport. He said, oh, no problem. Give him to an Arabic, and he lands me at the airport, the Queen Alia airport, yeah. And he just dumps all the luggage out and takes off. And I'm looking at the map and saying, gee, this doesn't seem to be the right. This is the airport. This is the international airport. This is not, I don't think this is where we should be. It turned out we were at the wrong airport. That the real airport was a military airport about 30 miles away, and the plane was due to take off at 11 o'clock, and we had to be there, no, take off, yeah, by 11, we had to be there, and it's now like after 9. They were standing with all their luggage. And I saw on the far side of this massive barrier a bus on the arrival side. And I thinking I was younger than I was, almost pole vaulted over the barrier, went to the bus driver who was just beginning to put the luggage in. And I said, how much? I began to roll off $100 bills. And when I got to 3,000, he said, deal done. Threw out all the luggage, moved it around the far side, we put everybody on the bus, caught the plane, and we got to Helsinki. Okay? Now, I did what I had to do. That's what works, that's what you do. So again, and I think now my job's finished, because we had all the people who were there from South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, Ralph Meyer from Northern Ireland, Martin McGuinness, Jeffrey Donaldson, all the chief negotiators. They're all ready to go. Until about 4 guys of the Iraqis began to approach me with very grim smiles, not smiles, looks on their face. I said, what's wrong? One of them said, his room. He has a double bed. I only have 2 single beds in my room. Why don't I have a double bed? Exact same thing. The narcissism of small differences. Somehow giving the guy with the double bed was treating that person a little bit better than giving me a single bed. So they were all engaged here, and they wanted to know where was the agenda. And we said there was no agenda, that they knew what they should talk about far better than any outsider did. And that they had to understand that this was their conference, that they would set all the rules from when they got up in the morning to what they'd have for breakfast, when would there be a coffee break, when we'd start in the afternoon, and what we would do in the evenings, which was nothing because we were about 3 hours out Helsinki in a forest. And they accepted. It was their conference. Okay, first thing done, we said, we're here to serve you and assist you. We have nothing other role other than that. Everything else is yours to do. We said, before you do anything, we want you to listen to the narratives of Northern Ireland and of South Africa. I want each of these to tell you, or to narrate to you, how they came to a point in their own conflicts where they recognized that doing what they were doing something over and over again that was producing the same result was getting them nowhere. The point at which they realized they would have to negotiate and compromise, and how they sold that to their constituents, and how they moved into negotiations and through the negotiation process, and what obstacles there were, and how they became aware of the fact that if you are engaged in an intense negotiating process, you intend to become disengaged from your constituents. You tend to get way ahead of your community. And how you dealt with that problem when the feedback the communities you were dealing with rebelled against you. So at each step they went through it, and what happened when this is going on was that you could see Iraqi heads begin to nod. They were beginning to identify with what they were hearing. So immediately barriers began to fall. And in the same way as language, speaking the same language gave you an access, being able to say, wow, I don't know where these people came from, but they're talking about our problems. Breakthrough. That's all it took. Now they're beginning to interact in a different way. They're going to put their agenda together, and that worked for 3 days. And we're coming to the final day, and we showed them a document from Northern Ireland that was named after George Mitchell, now President Obama's special envoy to the Middle East, and at one time Bill Clinton's special envoy to Northern Ireland. And it's a document called the Mitchell Principles. Because while he was there as envoy, poor Mr. Mitchell had to listen to the bickering parties from Northern Ireland hurl nothing but insults at each other for 18 straight months. And he said one day, I have had it. I'm going home. I'm leaving unless you do one thing. If you cannot agree on the substance of things, try to agree on the rules that you will follow in the conduct of negotiations with each other. Again, alike to the principles you were talking about. What are to engage in a negotiation process, lay out the things that every side must follow. And they laid out seven principles that became known as the Mitchell Principles. And from that point, those 7 principles were the guiding tool that every side had to follow to participate in the negotiating process. Well, we showed them this document, and we had already got it translated into Arabic, and so they became very interested after they read it. So not our instruction, our suggestion to them was, listen, we're going to leave you alone. Why don't you try to do something, if you're interested, along similar lines? Between you Sunnis and Shias, if you want to negotiate with each other, set up the boundaries, the rules everyone must follow. We left them for 8 hours, and they came out with the document, 12 principles they'd agreed on. And they signed off all their names to it. And they were astonished with themselves. We were more astonished, but that's different. We didn't show it. They were Iraqis love video cameras. Everything is a video. They're videotaking themselves, signing the thing, and they were elated. And their thing was, they said, we must take this forward, we must take this back to our leaders and tell them they must sign on to this. And they did that, and they went back, and that was in September. That was the 4th of September 2007. And between that and the following April, I went back to Iraq 14 times, and then I spent 7 weeks after April in Iraq. On the second round, after one thing after another, we managed to again airlift 36 people, this time from Baghdad directly to Amman. And they gathered there, and after 3.5 days, they produced the framework of 17, I think, principles, and 15 mechanisms to ensure that those principles were agreed with. But they couldn't agree on certain things, and there was an air of disappointment. So I, with the translator, who I had recruited in Baghdad, and we had worked very closely together, and I had picked out the 5 most important leaders who were there, and including Sheikh Human Hammoudi, who's the chairperson of the Constitutional Review Committee. And I took the document around them 7 times all night. We had 15 different drafts of the same document, took the last 3 drafts, and had them go through it, and they stayed with it throughout the night. And at the morning, they had all signed off on an agreement, which they said they would discuss with their colleagues on the plane back, and we didn't break it to the press. Well, I had learned by then how things are done in Iraq, and mostly they're not done. My guiding principle is just nothing works. Phones don't work, the electricity doesn't work. This is 2007, the water doesn't work, and the photocopying machines don't work, and internet is available 2 or 3 hours a day. That's in Parliament. There's no internet cafe. Well, you can in the Green Zone. There's nothing. So I went back and I spent 7 weeks. 7 weeks going to every single person who'd been in Baghdad, in Helsinki, and worked through with them each of their objections so that everybody could actually sign on to the same document. And that's here, what was called the Helsinki Agreement, which was signed in Baghdad on the 5th of, I had all the signatures, so it was really a formal ceremony, on the 5th of Baghdad, 2008. Now, there are a couple of things that are important. One, in working out some of the differences, it sometimes became clear that the Iraqis involved were doing things because they didn't want to disappoint me, because I couldn't understand why I kept coming back to Iraq. I mean, even they were saying, how can we get out, So, we were a relationship was developing where they didn't want to let me down. So I had to take that into account when they signed on. You know, were they doing it because of me or because they really wanted to? When this agreement was to be signed, al-Maliki, or the ceremony for it was to be signed, al-Maliki stepped in and said it was not. And the Iraqi said, "We will take care of everything. We are going to celebrate your coming." We were bringing in the people from Northern Ireland and Iraq, and their Department of Reconciliation, headed by Akram al-Hakim, said, "We will take care of everything." And then the Prime Minister's office stopped it cold. He just stopped it. So one day they were beginning to print this document, and the next day the presses had stopped. And luckily enough, I had arranged for these to be printed on the outside, so they were coming in anyway. And then he told the hotel that they could not host the reception, and he told his office did, and there's only one conference room which is used by everybody from Condoleezza Rice and Robert Gates. It's in the El Rashid, great, beautiful big hall. And he said we couldn't use the hall, nothing could be used, and in fact he was behaving unconstitutionally, because he was overriding what Parliament had agreed. And saying Parliament could not, he was overriding what Parliament as a whole had agreed to do, which was to host this event, and it was members of Parliament and the leaders of the political parties who had hosted the event. So we got into a real standoff, and it was very difficult, because my friends in Iraq who had put their lives on the line to me on many occasions were saying, "Padraig, let it go. Don't do it. Just don't do it." I said, "No. I mean, this man is behaving like an authoritarian leader, and if this is what all money and lives have gone for, is to build this kind of democracy, and if this is what we've been doing for the last 2 years, helping to cement this kind of creeping authoritarianism, we're not having any part of it. He has no right." Now, you can't say something without having power. And our power was that because Martin McGuinness got a lot of press out of his first trip to Helsinki, and we called him I hope none of this goes public, we had a nickname for him now as the Global Peacemaker. We had persuaded the BBC to send a crew with them to come to Baghdad to have the BBC film Martin McGuinness standing beside Sheikh Hamoud Kamudi and all the leaders of all the parties while they all engaged in this ceremony, and in fact to televise the whole ceremony. So I had to tell my friends, the BBC is going to arrive with this guy, and you block it. We're going to be standing there, or at least I am, saying they're not here because Prime Minister al-Maliki stopped it from happening. And I'll go crazy. And this will become an issue in American electoral politics, because this will be around the world on BBC World News the following day. What do you want to do? So this event was to take place on a Saturday at 2 o'clock. On Friday, Mr. Benditson came in. They tried to stop flights, but people getting on flights, but I already told people that if they got an instruction from any Iraqi that they were not to come, they were to ignore it. And they did, so they all arrived. 2 from South Africa, 2 from Northern Ireland. And then they probably said, "Now look, that's the situation. These guys are going to be standing around with the BBC saying, 'What's happening? You're going to have hell on your hands.'" And Mr. Benditson had a good relationship with the National Security Advisor, Dr. Al-Rabai. And Dr. Al-Rabai, no Iraqi leader, not one leader. There were 5 people could have gotten in touch directly with al-Maliki. No one of them would do it. Not one of them would do it. But Benditson talked to Al-Rabai, the National Security Advisor, and he rang al-Maliki, and al-Maliki was behaving a bit crazy, which I learned he does quite frequently. And he said we could have the event if it was his event, i.e. it would be his event, al-Maliki, and that he would vet the guest list. Well, the thing he would have the event meant that the kitchen was opened, and we could start could order the food, okay? But I said no. I kept saying no, up until we reached a compromise at 3 minutes past 12. I noted in my diary and on my email when we had the event. It was our event, and rather than it being as it was a very simple ceremony where all the principles would be read out in Arabic and supposedly translated, and it fell to me was to thank the Prime Minister for the help he had given. So I swallowed and said, okay, no problem. And then Dr. Al-Rabai made a long speech about how important the Prime Minister was. And then we had a nice, lovely buffet afterwards with the people who were all there. Everyone who signed the agreement was there. Now, how does reconciliation come? Some of the people who came and said they would never come if al-Maliki had anything to do with it were some of the hardline Sunni parties who detested al-Maliki and everything he stood for, who thought he was going very slow about the Ba'athification, that he was loading up the security forces with Shias. But all the Kurdish parties were involved in the second round. Everyone was involved. And yesterday, the Washington Post carried a feature that al-Maliki and the man who headed that bloc was a man called Salah al-Mutlaq, okay, who had been a fringe member of the Ba'athist Party but was the leader of this bloc in Parliament, and a guy who you had a touch of Irish in him because he liked to drink at night and get up late in the morning, you know. And a lot of Iraqis I found liked, during the dinners, make sure the menu is right and make sure there's no alcohol around. Well, we had a little den downstairs where we would go at night, and the guys would take out cigars and take out the brandy that we had brought with us. The second night, footsteps, down come a couple of Iraqis. Oh, have a cigar? Sure. Have some brandy? Oh, why not? Third night, bum, bum, 7 or 8. Fourth night, nearly everyone is there, okay? Again, bonding over cigars and brandy. Things they wouldn't do with each, and would never tell when they went back. Hey, this is what we were doing. Don't tell tales out of school. So, I lost my thread going backwards. Yeah, Salah al-Mutlaq, I read yesterday in Washington Post that he had formed an alliance with al-Maliki for the national elections. It's going to be the previous Prime Minister, the first one, Alawi, with Salah Mutlaq, his bloc, hardline Sunnis, and the Dawa Party is going to become the new alliance. In effect, al-Maliki is betting because he did so well in the provincial elections, he can sideline the religious parties and put together a bloc of secularist parties. That seems to be his bet. Now, I don't know whether it's certainly not reconciliation, but it's convenience. And maybe convenience is a prerequisite to reconciliation. Now, I have come back to Kirkuk because of a special interest in Kirkuk, because they say as Kirkuk goes, so will Iraq. And there are 2 issues to be settled in Kirkuk. That is the internal form of governance it will have, because in Kirkuk you have Kurds, you have Turkmen, you have Shia Arabs, Sunni Arabs, Assyrians, and a small number of Christians. And they have to find a way of sharing power among themselves for their internal governance on the Kirkuk Provincial Council. And the second thing unresolved, the most important, is the status of Kirkuk. Historically, the Kurds lay a claim to Kirkuk, and they want Kirkuk to be part of Kurdistan, which is the autonomous area of Iraq under Kurdish rule, which is entirely different from the rest of Iraq. There is no American presence, and there's no Iraqi security force presence. And you can walk about the streets and you feel safe. There's no violence. And in fact, you can fly from here and go to Kurdistan and go on holiday there, beautiful countryside, but you can't fly to Baghdad. In other words, you have, even though it's part of Iraq, with an Iraqi passport can get you into Kurdistan, but it can't get you into Iraq. Okay, if you follow. I've gone back to Kirkuk, which is not in Kurdistan. It's outside it, but the border doesn't matter. It's not. And so there should have been mandated by the Constitution of 2005 a referendum in Kirkuk by the end of 2007 to determine where it would belong, whether it be in Kurdistan or whether it would be remain in the rest of Iraq. And what happened is that during the 70s and 80s, particularly in the 80s, is that Saddam Hussein moved Kurds out of Iraq, out of Kirkuk, and displaced them into other parts of Iraq or executed them because Kirkuk sits on the largest oil reserve in Iraq. It has 13% of all the oil reserve in Iraq. So you're literally in Kirkuk, you're literally standing on oil. So it's a strategic trophy. Now Turkey has an interest in the status of Kirkuk because it is the kind of the external guarantor of the rights of Turkmen, and Turkmen feel they are discriminated against by Kurds. As do the Shias and the Sunnis in Kirkuk, because definitely Kurds are in a plurality and they probably are in a majority. Now, but is it a real majority? And this is where you come down to the numbers game. There hasn't been a census in Iraq since 1957. So how are you going to determine who can vote and who can't vote? Since 2003 or 4, the Kurdish leadership has been calling for all the Kurds who were displaced from their properties in Kirkuk to come back and reclaim their property. So hundreds of thousands of Kurds have come back to Kirkuk. Now they can't reclaim their property because some of the people who are living in their property are Arabs who have been living there for 20 years. So they've set up a complex mechanism where Kurds get compensated for the loss of their house and they get money for a new house. But beyond the people who rightfully own or could claim to have been residents of Iraq, Kurds from all over Iraq have descended upon on Kirkuk. So Arabs are saying, well, they shouldn't be included in a referendum. At the same time, the Kurds are saying, well, the Arabs who were put here by Saddam Hussein should not be counted as residents. So they can't resolve the problem. So Kirkuk can blow up at any time. So I thought here was a place to begin with the Helsinki principles, working at the local level. So I went to Kirkuk, met with the Kirkuk Provincial Council. But at that time I decided that we have to create a broader arc. So building on the idea that if divided societies, if the Irish and Africans, two different continents with two different cultures, could come, and because they were divided, and share with Iraqis in a way where the Iraqis were able to do something for themselves, I thought, why not try to take this and use it on a city level? So I asked the people the leadership in Kirkuk whether if I could put together 4 or 5 divided cities like themselves with power sharing divisions within them on ethnicity and religious grounds, whether they would come to a forum in Boston and I got on marvelously with the Kurds, but the Kurds are very much like the Irish. I mean, because we both were oppressed by the British. And of course, in the Middle East, any place you go, everyone was oppressed by the British. So saying you're Irish is like flashing, hey, we're one of you. The first thing, Irish passport, different. You're not, big. How people who were oppressed in the past have still, by a similar power, kind of just get along better than, if they hadn't been. Because they all have stories of oppression that have been gone from generation to generation. And that's one of the things that I get into when I talk about reconciliation, how difficult it is. So they agreed. So from the 14th to 16th of April at UMass Boston, I just sealed off just today on getting the last flights. Oh, God. We'll have 8 people from Kirkuk, from every ethnic bloc, 8 from Northern Ireland, from Derry and from Belfast, 8 from Mitrovica, from Kirkuk, Mitrovica in Kosovo, and Mitrovica in Serbia. Remember, that was the little bit in the Baltics that could not be resolved. So we have the mayors on both sides coming and the ministers, and 8 people from Nicosia, from the Greek Cypriot side and from the Turkish side, who will all get together in Boston for 4 days. And the object of their deliberations is going to be, okay, if after being this close to each other and discussing your problems and seeing that you have so much in common and to share with each other, do you think it might be a good idea if you set up a permanent forum, an exclusive club of divided cities? So in order to qualify for membership, you'd have to prove you were divided. So you couldn't have any city come along and say, hey, I want to be strict criteria. Well, how much violence? None. Get out of here. So that's the object. And then each year, each city would host all the other cities on a rotating basis. Take a delegations of 10 or 12 people, bring them to their city, show them how they deal with all the problems of interfaces, how they have gone about reconciliation within their cities. Because they're all, some of the cities are at a higher level of emergence, in transition. Some are at a very low level, like Mitrovica. Some are underdeveloped. So what processes are you putting in place to bring about reconciliation? What mechanisms have you got in place to deal with flashpoints, interfaces where the two communities, whatever, get together? What things you have in place to kind of be able to monitor how these things will happen and when they happen. Now, what happened when the soldiers in Northern Ireland were shot, British soldiers, and the two communities came together, was an overt sign of that, something good, but really nothing to do with reconciliation. It had more to do with fear. Everyone thought, this might lead to all hell breaking out again. No one wants that. But the idea is really to create political space, particularly for the people in Kirkuk, because on the agenda is that Kirkuk will adopt the Helsinki principles. And if they do that, if the Kirkuk Provincial Council declares that they have adopted this agreement, and I suggested, hey, every one of your leaders signed this. You summon them to Kirkuk and ask them why they signed it, why they put their signatures to it. Are they going to live up to what their signatures say? Because if they do live up to what their signatures say, it'll mean that the problem of Kirkuk can be resolved by non-violent means. Because at the moment in Iraq, which is now kind of dropped out of the news here, because you've moved on to another disaster in Afghanistan that's going to end up in the same way, at least in my opinion, that's the way it's going to end up, is that al-Maliki has moved units of the Iraqi army up to and adjacent to Kirkuk, but he has taken all Kurdish troops out of that formation and moved them back to Baghdad or Basra. So what you have on one side is an Arab army, and what you have on the other side is the Peshmerga, which is a highly trained army of the Kurds in Kurdistan. And what you want to avoid, because all hell would break loose, is a war between the two. So if the Kirkuk Provincial Council, now been given space to develop other relationships, and are beginning to feel more empowered themselves, that the fate of Kirkuk, in fact, belongs in their hands. Not in the hands of al-Maliki, or not in the hands of the Kurdistan government, but in their hands. They can say, if they adopt this principle, saying, you, our leaders, sign this and we accept it, or we accept it in a modified form that is suited to our conditions. What it will mean is that they are saying to everybody, whatever you do about Kirkuk, we in Kirkuk, from all sides, all factions, everybody wants it solved and resolved by non-violence. And that's the point you want to get to. And if you can just get to that point alone, you can deal with how you go about putting the methodology or whatever together. But they have got to stand up and say, we have taken what you agree to, not us, you, our leaders, agree to, and we accept it, which means we are demanding that you live up to your promise. There will not be violence. We Turkmen say it, we Christians say it, we Assyrians say it, we Shias say it, we Sunnis say it. And if we get to that far, and we start bringing in people from other cities, and you know, one of the beautiful things about Kirkuk, it has such a bad reputation that, you know, don't go there, it's dangerous. You know, why NGOs don't succeed in Iraq, and why the UN is such a failure in Iraq, is that it's because they're afraid. They live behind absolutely astonishingly barricaded communities. They travel with hordes of bodyguards. The Iraqis see the fear in their eyes. How can they deal one-on-one with somebody surrounded by 14 bodyguards? If you want to deal with an Iraqi, or if you want to deal with anybody in any conflict situation, you must walk in there, unarmed, not afraid, and deal with them face to face, and then another barrier goes down. You are behaving like a human being to them. You are not afraid of something happening to you. You're not looking over your shoulder saying, oh my God, can I be out of here in 10 minutes? You know, you relax. You become one. You go to their homes. And do you know what? Nothing happens to you. Because most people who have been kind of abducted in Iraq have been abducted by gangs, not individuals, and they've been stupid. You know, they've put themselves in stupid situations. But if you go into an Iraqi home in a place like Kirkuk, you're as safe as walking down the street here, because the community will make sure you're safe. And people and kids start following you around, you know, and you start playing soccer with the kids in the streets. Yeah, you know, Manchester United, yeah, Chelsea, woo, you know, that's all they watch. Only channel Iraqis care about, only channel they care about is the channel that brings in the Premier League from Britain every Saturday and Sunday. They don't care about the news channels, but that channel is sacred. If that works, things are not too bad. That was the first question, okay? Maybe I should stop. I shouldn't. No.
I know there are a lot of questions in this room for you, so maybe we have time for
whatever anybody wants. 2 or 3 before we start the larger conversation among the participants. Questions for Padraig O'Malley? Yeah.
What's the very durable?
Pardon? Sorry, yeah, I'm a bit deaf. which helps too.
It's highly enjoyable discussion. Thank you. My question is, it seems to me that between you and the other speakers, it seems that each one of you speaks out a gap in between what you would call the local way and what the other presenters would call the structural or the principle, sort of like a methodological way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
So I guess my question is directed to what it seems like you are speaking to what a local, sort of a local way of I'm sorry, and the other speakers are sort of directed to what they would see it's a systemic point of view. And I feel as if that between all three of the speakers, it seems like you guys are trying to work towards a gap that is in between the systemic and the local. So my question is, would you see that avenues into that gap, which is leading to being reconciliation, is between either experience and language? And experience could be, as you can say, sympathy and imagination, and the language would be directed more towards the structural level, which would be,
This agreement has not a word that was not bargained over by the Iraqis themselves. That's why I said I went to 15 drafts before there was even agreement on a broad outline, and then it took 8 weeks of going around to individual after individual and then going back to individual after individual to get them agree on the language. And sometimes they were talking to each other, and most times I was just a bystander because they were speaking in Arabic to each other, looking for the right word that they all could agree on. So I see myself as being nothing but a missionary without a belief. I don't want to change people's minds. I don't change how they want to think. I want to just put them together and let them do what they want to do. So my function is to bring them together and then to surround them with people who have gone through experiences that they might be able to relate to. Okay? Experiences that have their root very often in long embedded behavioral characteristics that are common across cultures, like the double bed, the size of the bar, okay? These kind of things. And these people only act in Boston in next week. They will only act, again, the format will be the same. There will be no agenda. These cities will come and they'll be told to put their own agenda together. But before they do that, to listen to each other. Okay? And then they will start working on their own. And everything they do will be what they want to do. And the people we will use as facilitators will be only used to try to focus discussion if it starts going off into all kinds of irrelevant directions, as it often does. But not to say, why don't you? Or don't you think you ought to? This was used someplace else I have a great model I can share with you. None of that. It's just them working on their own with each other. But if I can answer it better if that's not good afterwards, okay?
Okay. Stephen?
Thanks. I was wondering, you mentioned a couple of times the problem of the people who are involved in these processes getting ahead of the people they represent. But I don't think you said anything directly about how you try to avoid or overcome that problem, right? So they're having this intense personal...
Sorry, I got the first part. The second part was?
So if there's a problem of the people involved in the process that you are describing,
yes,
because they're forming these relationships, but the people that they represent, the general populations they represent, are not having this experience. And you noted that that's a problem, right? So they're speaking as representatives. What steps are taken, or how do you avoid the problem that you get agreement among this subgroup, but you still have the conflict in its full fury among the greater population.
In South Africa, this happened with the ANC. The ANC got way ahead of their constituency and were making bargains with the government that their constituency thought was really a capitulation to the apartheid government. And it got to a point where the ANC broke off negotiations. Now, they got a very good excuse to do so. And something happened, a massacre happened, and they took advantage of the massacre to break off negotiations, and used that period to recommunicate with their constituency, to go back and listen to them, and listen to what their concerns were about what they were doing. And it wasn't until they were satisfied that they had taken those concerns on board that they reopened negotiations with the government. Parallel with that is the problem the Sinn Féin had. I mean, one day when this full story is written about the disarmament of the IRA and how it happened, it'll be a marvelous story. Here's an organization in business for over 100 years, committed to just one objective, and that is that the only way to get the British out of Ireland is by the use of physical force. Period. Over and out. You get into the first of all, you have to sell them on that is the leadership of Sinn Féin have to sell them. First of all, they have to sell their community on maybe it's time to enter negotiations, and this means that the IRA has to declare a ceasefire. Now, community has no problem with that, their constituency, because they often do ceasefires. Now you come to guys, you have to give up all your arms. In effect, you have to put yourself out of business. Now, how the leadership of Sinn Féin and those within the high command of the Army Council and the IRA brought that about, it will be, when it is untold, a great story. But more importantly is that during that period, people like Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness were in more danger from people in their own community than they were from the British Army. Because many the people, one of the men who was arrested in connection with the murders 2 weeks ago, a man named Colin Duffy, was a very senior member of the IRA, and he would not go along with disarmament. So the IRA did what it usually does. It splits. And its history is one of splits. For over a year you could take a tree trunk, and every time it gets someplace, some level, or Sinn Féin is, it divides up into those who want to go the constitutional route and those who want to maintain the military route. So the real IRA will persist, won't go away. Republicanism in that form will not go away. It's how it is contained and dealt with. And this is where I go back to the analogy with addiction. An alcoholic or a drug addict or anyone with any addictive disease, there is no cure for an addictive disease. But there are things that can keep people from engaging in the addictive behaviors or the addictive actions. And there's an Alcoholics Anonymous, or there is Narcotics Anonymous, and all of those, and they're all 12 steps program, and very successful programs. But the key is that the person in those programs must recognize that they're only in recovery, and that they will always be in recovery as long as they follow not the rules, but change the behaviors that are required, change their own behaviors. In the same way, in a divided society, when peace is declared, peace is just a piece of paper. The violence is stopped. Because violence is stopped doesn't mean peace has arrived. And when peace has arrived, it doesn't mean reconciliation has arrived. So the society must see itself as being in recovery, that it is not ever going to reach a point of where things are resolved. They never will be. Those divisions will always persist. It's how you manage the divisions. And if they see themselves as being in recovery and begin to put in place the instruments that strengthen and nurture that recovery, that's when they begin to be able to withstand the shocks to the system that come from the outside, like the killings of the IRA, whatever, 2 weeks ago. But that could have easily gone the other way. I mean, friends of mine had to engage for days in discussions with loyalist, that's Protestant paramilitary organizations who have not yet decommissioned their arms, who wanted to retaliate, i.e. kill a Catholic, any Catholic, just to retaliate. And had to be talked and talked and talked down and around the clock for that not to happen. And those kind of people have always got to be there. And they can't say, the guys seem okay, you know, it doesn't happen. It's constant process of reminding yourself where you are so that you can start moving forward. Constant process of building instruments of strengthening the peace. A constant reminder that you're only in recovery, and that if you think all your problems are resolved, you will start slowly slipping back to your old ways of behaving, because hatreds don't go away. I mean, I think, you know, Obama, the most important speech given, I refer everybody to it. Now, it was nice to come in through, walk by and touch the monument to Martin Luther King. The most important speech given in last year's campaign, and maybe in the last for decades in this country, was the one that President Obama gave on the 18th of March last year on race. It's a classic. It's a classic because it tells how grievances from the past are never forgotten. They're transmuted from one generation to the next. You know, why would the Irish, you know, my Boston Irish, now the most successful ethnic group in the United States, in income, in I was going to say in banking and business, but that would put them right down there to the bottom. But in positions of power, still Irish working class people look at every single thing that is given to a black person and say, why aren't they getting that when our people never got that? We had to make it on our own. No one ever gave us a handout. We did it on our own. Why are my tax dollars being used to help other people? They should do it the way we did it. It just takes discipline, hard work, keeping their families together, not bloody well having kids going off having 3 or 4 kids. Well, they have the kids because they get the money. Those prejudices are not spoken in the open community, but they're spoken around the dinner table. That's where they're spoken. And that was the beauty of Obama's speech, was the real silence on a Sunday. The silence of what people were saying in their living rooms after service, not during services. I read it again before I came here, and I marveled that he could have put it together in such a short space of time, because it is just draws on everything that we are talking about. You can substitute for where it says, you know, whites and Afro-Americans. You can substitute blacks in South Africa, whites in South Africa, Protestants in Northern Ireland, Catholics in Northern Ireland, it's Sue's and Sheena's. The paradigm is the same. Grievances that don't go away. And now they're controlled enough here, enough control mechanisms in place so they don't break out in riotous behavior. I mean, the last time that happened was during busing. And one of the things I intend to show of these people from all these divided societies when they come here is I'm showing them a film footage of kids being, those of you who were alive in the 1970s in Boston, when Boston was at civil war with itself, when kids were being bussed into South Boston, and you would see in the morning dawn the lights of the buses, and then the lights of 20 maybe police cars in front of their lights going, and then the guys on their motorbikes, hundreds of them, slowly going down into Boston. You say, well, I wonder who's in that bus? Just kids going to school. And the lines of police with their arms tied to each other, locked, the way police lock each other to keep quiet, were exactly the same as you would see in Portadown, which is a town in Northern Ireland, where Protestants insist every year on marching down a street called Garvaghey Road. Now, I went to Garvaghey 14 years in a row to watch this behaviour every year, played out the very same way, and my favourite point of it is reconciliation. There was a group, and a priest in a group, and they were outside the curb, outside the police line, and they were singing, bum, 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 give peace a chance, give peace a chance, give peace a chance, da, 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 da. Then there was a slow march of, they'd reached a compromise where just 12 orange men would walk through, just 12 of them. So the 12 came down marching with their bowler hats on and their sticks, walking, bum, 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 dead silence. And give peace a chance, give peace a chance. But just as they passed the group, they all dropped their instruments, stood up and said, "You fucking orange bastards!" Then they sat down, picked up their instruments and went right back to give peace a chance.